Okay, so we're going to finish up and talk about some more of the basics, some more of the fundamentals, things that you may or may not have ever seen before, but I just don't want to leave anything out. There's no way to show all of the different functionality with just one set of data. So the status of funds, for example, is cross-sectional. It's not time series. There's a lot of time series, cool tricks that you can use that I can't show with this data. But as we go along and work with the general ledger, or I show you how these other pivot tables are built, you'll see some of this other functionality. But I want to try to be comprehensive here with some typical things that you need to be aware of. So I'm in my pivot table. I'm going to right click, and we've seen the field settings. Let's look at this again. So subtotals and filters, you can none, automatic. That's kind of changing what we had before, seen before with turning on and off subtotals and grand totals. I don't typically do anything in this one. The number format, of course, is to change the formatting of that particular field. Layout and print, so repeat item labels, insert blank rows, show items with no data. You can see that there's a few different ways to get at some of the same functionality. It just depends what you grow accustomed to and how best you like to do that. I'll hit cancel, and I'll go back in, and I want to pivot table options. Now there's a lot of stuff in here, so I just want to do a cursory overview of things that you may use somewhat frequently, or maybe not at all. But layout, merge, and center with cell labels, I don't use that. Maybe it's something I should, but I don't. I don't use this either. Format for error value, show what. So if you know that you're going to get an error value always, this is one way. So I can select this, and if anything in here becomes an error, then show, if you're talking percentages, you can say 0.00 with a percentage sign, and that's what it'll show. For empty cells, show what. So if it comes up as empty, it will remain empty if you don't change this, but you can make it say something to alert you, or just to stay in the same format as everything else. Preserve cell formatting. Well, let me back up. We talked about autofit columns with widths on update. It is nice functionality. It takes a little bit of that thought process out, but if you were to have more than one pivot table, like this one here is the status of funds for Chris, and let's say, okay, I'm going to put my deems below there. It's a possibility. It's typically not a best practice, but if your status of funds, you know for a fact you're not going to be changing how many categories or how you look at it, maybe you'll do that so you have it on the same page. Auto-fitting column widths could throw you off a little bit there, because what will happen is this is pivot table 1 up here. The next one below that may be pivot table 2. On refresh, Excel is going to refresh. They call these objects, so it's going to refresh this object first, and then it's going to go to pivot table 2, pivot table 3. So there are orders in which it does that. So if this table below here gets refreshed, it's going to reset the auto width calculation for this one. So just be aware of that. Preserving cell formatting on update. So if I do all this cool formatting and lines and borders and everything else, and I were to unselect that, it's going to take all my formatting away on the next update. Maybe you want that to happen, just so you have a clean slate, but that's what that'll do. Totals and filters, again, you can tell it to do that. Right here, display, show, expand, collapse, display field captions and filter drop downs. I don't touch that. Classic pivot table. If you like where you could select your fields over here and drag them into that little blue areas on those old pivot table formatting, I think before 2007, you can select that and it'll kind of revert back to that feel for you. Alt text, I never do anything with this one. Moves these around for me. Data, here's one, save source data with file. So let's say, for example, we unselected this. What it's going to do is it's not going to remember the cache. It's going to say, okay, I've got my pivot table all formatted the way I want, but don't remember that cache. So if you were to do that, the trade-off is you'll save file space. However, you have to refresh it again. if you want to change anything or drill down. Enable show details. Here's one that I do use. Number of items to retain per field. I usually select none. And I say that because let's say I'm using the same reports year over year, and there's some line of accounting detail or things that just don't show up in my data anymore. Well, I don't want Excel to be remembering all that stuff, because when I do slicers or if I filter, it's just going to keep populating with that old information that just isn't there anymore. So typically I'll select none, so it only shows me what's in the current data set. That is how I like to do it. And printing, print, expand, collapse buttons with pivot tables, set print titles. These are all the formatting. So if you wanted to show that, it's not going to print that plus or minus typically, but if you select that, it would. So that's pivot table options, and as you go through these, typically I'll unselect that one, I will select none, and then on here maybe I'll select or deselect that. Those are typical ones for pivot table options. Let's come up here to this field, and I'm going to add something. I'm going to show you the functionality on the Analyze tab. So we'll start left to right. Pivot table name. If you want to name this pivot table, and if you're going to be working with objects, you're going to find it to be a best practice to want to do that. So you can name your pivot table Sof or Chris Sof. I'll just leave it as a pivot table 1 for now. Options. So there's a few options. This one's kind of hidden, but if I press options, oh, there's my pivot table options again, so you might just kind of leave that there. But there's one other functionality in here, or a couple actually. So generate get pivot data. When working with the pivot table, and this is checked, so it's going to do that. If I wanted to do a formula in Excel but use pivot tables, I'm going to hit equals and select this. Now let's look at it up here. Get pivot data, AEP. Right, AEP. That's the column name for B2. B2 is basically it's referencing the top left so it can slice and dice. Fund code. So I'm going to go fund code is 58. Boom, 58, fund code, and then FY16, and then it finds this. What's nice about that is that it will always find it as long as there is a grand total or a subtotal for fund code 58 2016 AEP. It's going to find that. So this thing could expand, collapse all day long, and it'll find that. What's not nice about it is that if you're going to do what you would typically want to do with Excel stuff, like fill it down, it's like absolute referencing everything. It's not changing it. There's no fill down. So if you use that, be aware. To get rid of that, I'm going to go back to my Analyze tab, Options, turn that off, so now it's not selected. And now if I work with my pivot table, I'm selecting J8, not this sliced and diced reference to this here. So that won't find the correct value if you start to change your pivot table. So just be aware, you can do it both ways. Staying in that same thing, here's kind of a neat little trick. I've used it a few times. Show report filter pages. You see it's grayed out right now. It's because this is the report filter here. Let's say, for example, let me pick something that doesn't have too many unique values. So, well, let's do sales code, for example, or actually more realistic, we'll use RCCC. I'll just have to end up deleting a lot of tabs in this, but you'll see it in the video, and so that's the intent, is that you see the functionality. So now I have a report filter, and I can say show report filter pages. Not really intuitive. I've never found it to be really intuitive, but here's what it does. I have a pivot table. I've got it formatted exactly the way I want. Let's say this is the perfect format for whatever reason. And just to be a little more realistic, let me add in eq here. It's going to get a little messy for this particular one, so you can see all that civ pay stuff going on. But let's say you wanted to build out, you've formatted it perfectly. I want to save some time and have a pivot that's refreshed for all of my cost centers, and I got them grouped the way I want, and it's fine. Let's say I want to do that. what's going to happen is it's going to say show all report filter pages of RCCC. So it knows that, for example, let's say there are 50 RCCCs. If I hit OK, it's going to create a brand new tab for every RCCC that I have. So I'm going to do this and then I'll clean up the workbook real quick, but you'll see as soon as I hit this, it's going to populate a bunch of tabs here. So here we go. It's thinking, and now I have a report filter for every single one, same pivot table format, same everything, broken out by RCCC, and when I hit refresh, it'll refresh these, and it'll refresh them in that same thing, so it'll stay right there. So if you have the perfect setup for this, then go for it, have fun. Maybe work days. I'm going to select that one. I'm going to hit shift and select this one as well, so you can see where it says grouped. I grouped my tabs because I want to delete my tabs. I've got too many. So I'm going to right click and delete, and I'm back to where I was before. I'm going to take that eek out of there. So that's that functionality. Just wanted to show it to you. Moving on, field settings. So I'm in this field, fiscal year. This is another way to get to that prompt. Drill up, drill down. So drill down or drill through capability. If I were to go and I see something like this, like whoa, I'm way negative. You probably know this already, but pivot tables will be able to. I'm going to double click and drill down to the raw data that made that up. So as you get your, I'm going to just delete this sheet. As you get your pivot tables the way you want them, a really just quick way to get to the data, to look at the raw data, because you're still going to need to do that, is to drill down through your pivot table and see what's going on. I still have one of these guys hanging out from before. Let me delete him. So let's see what else we haven't talked about. Insert slicers. We'll get in more of that later. It's a fancy filter. This is not the best example for this, but slicers can be very, very helpful. Insert timeline's pretty cool when you have the right data, so maybe with the general ledger or some other examples. Filter connections. When you do slicers, you can have multiple slicers that connect to each other so that it's filtering at the same time, and we'll definitely show some videos that show that. Refresh is refreshing the entire workbook, or refresh just the pivot table itself. It would refresh that cache. It would grab back to this raw data, take another snapshot, and then we would have an updated refreshed pivot table. Change data source. We talked about that earlier, where we just can define or reassure ourselves where our data is coming from. And the one next to it was connection properties. We didn't make an external connection, so it's grayed out, but when we do make an external connection, down here in workbook connection pivot table 1.2 here, we'll talk about that one. Clear, you can clear filters, clear all. I don't like to hit clear all because it clears all. Select entire pivot table. That's really the only one I ever use for that one. And move pivot table. It's exactly as it says, move pivot table. Next video we're going to talk about field items and settings, specifically calculated fields and pivot charts. This is, as you would imagine, it's going to recommend some charting and things, and we'll get into charting later on in the video. So see you in the next one.